Thanks, Paul. Yeah, sure, I'll get straight into it. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm just going to talk to you, I suppose, about maximizing the benefits of spring grass. So look, most springs are the same. There is little challenges and opportunities that change from year to year. Um, you know, tight cash flow, workload can be issues on the farm. There's opportunities, I suppose, to grow more grass in the year. And I suppose the difference is maybe this spring is that I suppose the meal and fertilizer costs are higher. So therefore, any grass that is on the farm, there's huge opportunity there really to save on feeding costs. So and that also means saving on fodder, maybe carrying over extra this year for next year, so making less silage for next winter. And there's a large grass supply on farms at the minute. It's we haven't too many figures on it yet because people aren't starting to measure grass yet. But obviously we can see it was a great back end. It was very mild, and so there is a lot of grass around. So there's a great opportunity, and what that means is that every day that I suppose we can get animals out, and we're talking like different dates really for different people or different times for different people. So obviously, drier farms can start a bit earlier, and heavier farms just get out when they can. But each extra day at grass is giving you 270 per cow per day, or €2 per livestock unit per day. So for about 80 dairy cows out at grass, you're looking at about €200, €250 for per day to get them out. And if you had 50 cattle out at grass, that's about €100 a day to get them out. So that's money you're earning. So it says the grass is worth that, but I would actually put it down that you've earned that money because it is a challenge getting animals out. There is work, there's planning involved, so that all has to come into it. So the objective really is to utilize 1 ton of grass dry matter in the first rotation. Okay, so just to give people an idea of what that actually looks like. So about a fist of grass. Okay, so if you can imagine someone maybe depending on your farm situation, maybe some of your lower covers of grass, there might be about a fist of grass on it. So on average, we want to try and utilize about 2 fists of grass on every hectare across the farm. We want to set up pastures um, for high quality grass yields for the rest of the year. So if we can graze them out well, and we'll set them up for better quality and growing more for the year ahead. We'll have a better chance of managing grass quality in the summertime by grazing tighter in the spring. And then we're setting up either the herd for compact breeding, high milk production solids, or on the cattle or sheep side, higher live weight gain. Okay, and that's the opportunities. That's the objectives. They're the opportunities that are there just to set the scene. So I'm going to move my slides on a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to go through an example. So if we just take a 34 hectare farm, 85 acres, we'd say there's 90 livestock units on it. So this could be cattle farm, dairy farm, sheep farm. It all translates back to a stocking rate of about 2.64 livestock units per hectare, which I suppose on dairy farms is probably medium, and then on dry stock farms might be slightly high on the higher end. But either way, I'm just going to give a general example of how we utilize this grass. Okay, so we'll say there's an opening farm cover of around 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare, which roughly is about your 2 fists. So there is a lot of grass out there already. It's ahead of normal. Um, and I suppose we're just going to say that we're going to try and get animals out in early February and finish the first round in early April. So there's about 60 days there of actual days that we can graze. And there's going to be wet periods through that. There's going to be dry periods through that. There's going to be challenging weather. But the thing is that we have a plan in place to get out as many of those days as possible, and still have enough grass coming back in April time. So the reason that 60 days is there, so the first few paddocks that we graze, they'll have nearly 60 days to recover. And they need that length of time in the springtime to have enough grass for starting the second rotation in April. Okay. So if we just look underneath here, we'll see the wedge. So this is if you're using pasture base and measuring grass, you get a wedge like this for your opening farm cover. So basically, you walk around the farm, you put in how much grass is in each paddock, and you can sort of get a picture of how much grass is on your farm. On the left-hand side has the kilos of dry matter per hectare, and on the bottom then it's just the paddock numbers. So what we're trying to target first really is these paddocks here in the middle of the wedge. So they're sort of between, I suppose they're about 1.5 to 2 fists of grass high. So that's about 800 to 1,000 kilos of dry matter. They're the types of paddocks we're trying to target first. And I suppose the reason we try and target them is because they're lighter covers, so it's we can see they're not the heaviest covers of grass on the farm. So when animals go out first, they have a little bit of time to adapt to grazing them paddocks. Those paddocks, because they're lighter as well in cover, they're going to grow back quicker. So the heavier ones, like a silage cut, will take longer to come back. So those heavier ones shouldn't be grazed first. So the other types of paddocks you should target, I suppose, to graze first are the ones near the shed, the drier paddocks. The ones that have been reseeded lately, obviously they're going to have better growth in the springtime. That's why some of the reason they're reseeded. It's probably, if they're closer to the yard, those paddocks, they're easier to get stock in and out of. So if it is a case of having to run stock back in or whatever, we can do that. Um, I know it's slightly different on the sheep side, but on the dairy side, on the beef side, this is very much the same. The sheep side's a little bit different. You're probably going to start near the yard, but you're not really starting most mid-season flocks till March time. So um, we're slightly different, but I'll come back to that. Next, then we're sort of moving on to the second group of paddocks that we're grazing, and these are the heavy covers. So if you can imagine now, you've maybe got some stock out. This is in March time, so those first group of paddocks, we're talking about grazing them in February time if you're on a drier farm, and possibly, it's really when you can if you're on heavy farm. So that could be even this week if you had cattle go out grazing. If the ground conditions were good, you could go out this week even. So it's just about having that flexibility in the mindset. The next group of paddocks then you're grazing is early mid-March, so you're sort of your second third of your farm. You're splitting your farm up into three, sort of the first third, second third, and third third. And these paddocks, they're heavier covers. They could be maybe silage fields that generally tend to be cleaner swards. They're easier to graze out. They'd obviously want good infrastructure on them to have these heavy covers. And again, you've probably more animals out grazing in March, so again, you're going to get through more area. So you want to be able to have some heavier covers there to slow animals up, that you're not going to run through what you have actually left. Okay, and these paddocks, obviously, as I said, are going to be slower to recover, so they have a bit of extra time because they don't have to be back till sort of late April, and the growth should have picked up by then. Okay. And then the last group of paddocks, then they're generally the ones that have the lowest cover on them now. They're furthest from the yard. They're wetter or heavier paddocks. They're maybe permanent pasture paddocks or older permanent pasture that are slower growing. So if we graze them first, there's not going to be much back on them by April time compared to the reseeds. Okay, so they're the last ones. And I'm just going to escape out of this now and just actually bring it on to pasture base very quickly. Okay, so this is Pasture Base, and this is actually the mapping tool on Pasture Base, so it's very handy. And this is just a sample farm that I've done up based on the information I'm after giving you there. And what I'm going to do here now is just select some of these paddocks. So I'm just going to show you what I mean here. So the first ones really you want to graze, and this is where you want to concentrate over the next few weeks, is the first ones you want to graze, okay? So you're really looking at, the ones close to the yard as I was talking about. They're the right covers, they're 700-800 kilos of dry matter on them. So, you're less than 2 fists of grass basically, or around 2 fists of grass on them. They're good access, they're sheltered, they're drier paddocks. Okay, so they're the ones you're sort of targeting first. And as you can see, it's most logical. They're the ones you want to get out to first. They're near, they're handy for when you're busy, if you're calving or whatever. And again, even if you're lambing time, and this could be in March, it's those paddocks you want. You want them near the yard. You want sheep nearby in sheltered paddocks. Okay. So then the ones then you're looking at second, these are going to be some of your heavier paddocks, your heavier covers. Okay, sorry, heavier covers. So a lot more grass on them. They'll slow animals up. They're further away from the yard. Some big fields here, and they're sort of in the middle. Okay. So, and then just to point out some of the last paddocks then to graze. So we have some of the ones, and these are typical. They're low. There's not much grass on them now compared to the other ones. They can be wetter fields, older permanent pasture, as I said. So, there's very simple. If you have a map of your farm, you could easily map out and mark, even with a different colored marker, a few paddocks here that you're going to graze first. So in this farm scenario, really, for the first ones that we're grazing, we're talking about grazing a paddock a week. That's really what we're targeting. Okay, so for February time, so there's 5 paddocks, so it's a little over a paddock a week. So towards the end of February, we're getting up to maybe 2 paddocks a week. So that's all we have to get through. So you're talking. I suppose we'll just we'll just actually stop sharing there now and bring it back to some slides here just to finish off. Sorry, no. So you're talking about trying to set it up here. So there's a picture there, just an example, I suppose, of a farmer that set up wires to get cows out to those paddocks during February time. So you want to make sure that the grass is the right cover, as we were talking about. That 1 to 2 fists of grass, the paddocks. So if you're splitting fields and paddocks to set them up, you might need to consider having a water drinker at it, and you're trying to get the paddock square. And you want to really avoid long rectangular bits because cattle tend to you get this race course effect where cows and cattle graze up and down the field. Okay. You want to avoid that. Good infrastructure in and out of paddocks, so there's multiple access points into paddocks. That'll avoid any poaching and damage. So again, we don't want to do any poaching. We want to feed the animals well, and we want to try and get good graze outs. Okay. Um, and we're leaving cows, time before they get into the heavier covers to get into they go into some lighter covers first, then go into the heavier ones. And I suppose down to yourselves really. You're the ones earning this money at the end of the day. It's this flexible attitude. So you graze maybe some if there's drier periods, you graze some heavier paddocks. Wetter periods, you graze the drier paddocks. So always have a paddock there to spare that if a wet day comes, you can head into it. Okay. So I think that's really it. So just a few key points. So the basic is to have a plan in place, and you can see there how simple it can be. Splitting the farm into 3, and if you had a map, all the better, and just identify the paddocks to graze first. So walk the farm, check the ground conditions, do a farm walk if you can, and get an average farm cover, and set up your wires for grazing because that's half the battle is having it ready. And keeping the average farm cover throughout the spring over 500 kilos of dry matter. So that's basically, if the heaviest coverage you have on the farm goes less than 2 fists of grass, or the average is about only a fist of grass, that's when you need to really consider slowing down because you'll reduce the growth rates on the farm for later on, and that when you need them most coming into April. So it's a great opportunity to make the most of spring grass to earn more money in 2022. So best of luck to everyone.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, John. We'll take some questions there now, but I suppose before we take questions, I forgot to mention there in my intro that this meeting is being recorded. So just to mention that. So do we have any questions in, Kay?
Not at the moment. So if anybody has a question they'd like to put in, feel free to put it into the question and answer section. But just to kind of get the ball rolling, John, is there any particular management practices that people should be considering now in relation to clover? I don't know that because of the way fertilizer prices are going, there's a lot more people are conscious of clover. What are your recommendations for managing the farm, particularly on those paddocks where I might have a bit of clover, or where did they fit in those 3 sections that you're talking about?
Yeah, so there's probably one warning, and there's probably one bit of advice, I suppose. So one bit of advice is like the clover needs light, no matter what time of year it is. It needs light. So the way it gets light is getting good graze outs. So any paddocks that you have that have clover in them now, generally, if there's big heavy covers of grass on the farm, there's probably not much clover in them anyway, because that tends to happen. We try and close up the clover paddocks later in the year, so they're a bit more open. And they're not really carrying big heavy covers of grass, but to get them grazed down early, get them grazed down tight, and obviously avoid poaching on them so clover won't take too kindly to any sort of hardship. So we need to look after it a bit better. So they would be the few things, Kay.
And in relation to, you mentioned the on-off grazing or the few blocks or the few hours after milking, what are your recommendations on feeding the cow when she goes back in? In and feeding silage,
on-off grazing situation, yeah. So if we on-off graze, if you're talking about, it's usually on a dairy scenario, but we are, I suppose, working with some beef farmers who actually let cattle in out during the day and in at night as well. So it can be set up for any real enterprise. It's to I suppose have enough silage there that'll probably last them. If it's a dairy farm, that maybe even if they're milking in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, that the cows could be shut away from silage, so they're coming out in the morning time, and maybe at 10 o'clock after milking, and maybe the farmer goes and has his breakfast, and if you're going for on-off grazing, maybe it's 10 or 11 o'clock, they're getting them out for 2 or 3 hours. So by that stage, if they're shut away from silage for 4 or 5 hours, they maybe got some meal in the parlour. That's usually enough to put a bit of an appetite on the cows, so they make them go out and graze. Because the worst thing we want to do is let animals out to graze, and they don't want to because they're too full. So we have to be careful of that. So that would probably be the main thing. So just
one
making
last
sure that.
question for you, John.
Sorry, yeah, go on.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry, you're all right. You're all right.
Just in relation to pasture base, is the pasture base able to show where the data can show where the appropriate nutrients, where they give the best return, how to target the nutrients to give the best return?
Well, yeah. Well, one way of doing that is if you go back into your pasture base, if you have to obviously be measuring on pasture base and have data on your farm. But if you have a year's data on your farm, K, and it's accurate, you can go back into your annual tonnage report, and there's a filter button there to set the date. So you could set the dates between the 1st of January and we'll say the middle of April, or even the end of April. And I suppose you could see there what growth is on the paddocks, at that stage. And every farm probably has 2 or 3 or 4 paddocks that don't grow that well in the springtime. And pasture base will identify that very quickly. And those are paddocks that, instead of maybe, well, whatever the recommended might be 50, 60 units out by early April, on drier farms for those paddocks, it could be pulled back a bit more to maybe 30, 40 units, because that's all those paddocks are going to require for up until that period. So that's how I do it.